Hello, 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 my friends. It is Ren Presents time. I am your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, Part 2, Chapter 3, Hiei. Last week, we see Kay starting to worry about Sam as she's doing weird things. She's looking over her shoulder all the time. She's running from things all the time. And one time Kay thought he saw a funky, ghostly hand like reaching out for her. And then she runs as only she can. So he's like, what the hell is going on with my girlfriend? So he decides to go do some research and see if Sam might be sick. She's a monoma. There's not a lot of info on monomas, and Kay's not a hospitaller, and all he knows is what he can research and read and so forth. But he decides Sarah has this crazy library on the 50th floor of Ziodo Tower that she shares with her brother Philip when they're in the castle, but they spend every summer or every winter down south with the Duke and the Duchess, because her father, Lord Peter, is not a Vith, and it's just, he doesn't like how cold it gets up in Blanchford. So she has this crazy library, and she's got it stocked full of bullshit. She's got ghost stories, urban legends, unsolved mysteries, and she has a nicely organized section on monomas, because they're kind of a pet hobby of Sarah's. Well, not really monomas per se, but berserkicides. And we finally, in this chapter last week, find out what a berserkicide is, and it's kind of horrific. It's at any time, any monoma, whether it be old or young, male or female, can turn into a monster. They grow a second pair of arms that are kind of, as I developed the concept of a berserkicide, they're kind of primordial, kind of crab-like. They're kind of slimy and got like chitinous claws and so forth. So they grow a second pair of arms, and they also have a hole bursts into their head between their eyes that kind of oozes stuff, and nobody quite knows what that hole is there for. And then they suffer a radical change. Their personality, whoever they were their entire life, once they become a berserkicide, it's gone, replaced with an evil, slavering creature that's looking to do mayhem, looking to do horrible things, to kill as many people as it can get away with before it itself is killed. The berserkicides kind of burn out. So if they're not killed, they don't necessarily live that long, but usually they, like a wolf in the fold, they get hunted down and killed, and they can take quite a bit of damage before they go down. They always go down swinging. Berserkicides, not a pleasant thing. It's a word Sam doesn't even utter, and it's something all monomas fear, because it's something all monomas can become. Kay looks it up, and he says, these things are... His dad, Captain Davidge, thinks they're not real, but they're real. He reads about them, and it's just sad. And he sometimes has this nightmare that he's ashamed of, that he'll wake up and he sees Sam has become a berserkicide, is ready to go at his throat. And it's not a dream he's proud of. He finds a few other things in Sarah's mystery library. She's very well organized. He finds something that catches his interest. It's called Head Swarm, and it's a state monomas fall into when at the moment they've dreaded comes upon them. Usually it's the moment of their death, or the moment they become a berserkicide, if they're able to see these things in the future. And it's basically putting your mind elsewhere. When that dreaded moment is upon you, you just sort of let your mind go someplace else where there's no pain and suffering. They can just ride it out to the bitter end in relative peace. Head Swarm, and it's something that once you fall into Head Swarm, it's difficult to be rousted out of it. He also find some information on white amelia, and it's a flower, kind of like a daisy with a black button in the center, and it's a plant that grows very well in foggy, low light conditions, and it's a plant that offers sweet nectar to the right insect at the right time. If the wrong insect at the wrong time shows up, it'll get poisoned, but at the right time, they get a sweet reward. And monomas use it for lots of things. They use it in their mating rituals. They use it to cast aside their elder dreams. If you recall the beginning of the book in Sam's opening chapter, her uncles and aunts and brothers and sisters advised that she grab a white amelia flower and plant it at the mourning wall, and then her dreams of Kay will end. And it'll hurt for a long time, but they'll go away eventually. And that's what most monomas do, is they plant their flower at the mourning wall and cast their dreams aside. Of course, Sam did not do that. They also use the white amelia flower to line their Anuian jars. It's something, if you're an Anuian, like Sam is, an Anuian monoma, you come out of the womb only partially developed. They take longer than a smaller Konox monoma does, and they need more time in the womb. And so whenever a litter of monomas is born, a searcher looks through the litter and sees if they find the embryo of an Anuian amongst the fold. And if so, then they rush it into the Anuian jar and fill it with brine. Then they bury it up to the lid and then wait about 6 more months until it knocks, and then they bring out the fully developed child. Anuian jar and white amelia are closely related, and then white amelia is used in other mating rituals and so forth. So Kay received a dried white amelia in that in-lock letter, and he's like, okay, that's what that is. I had no idea. Sam never mentioned anything about it. And then he thinks, well, maybe Sam is falling into this head swarm thing, and she has some of the symptoms of head swarm, like listlessness, general apathy, but not all of them. I mean, she still knows where she is. She still recognizes Kay. So he thinks, well, maybe she's falling into some weird, malformed version of head swarm. So the next day, when Sam arrives at the castle, he and Kai take her to the village, which usually cheers her up, and she's just kind of in a morose mood until she sees a shop called the Mystery Den, and then she gets all excited. She throws off her pall of moroseness and it gets excited and wants to go in, and Kay and his sister Kai are like, I'm going here in this cheap tourist shop, but Sam drags him in. Sam is intoxicated, and she finds this little desk ornament that looks like a pistol on a mounted stand, and she begs Kay, buy this for me, please, I really want this. And he's like, why? Okay, fine, if it makes you happy, I'll get it for you. And then his sister Kai finds a t-shirt of his mother that has this hideous, ridiculous photograph of Countess Sigillis on the breast, where it's just a bad picture where she wasn't ready to have the picture taken. Her hair's not right. Her finger is in her nose. Her expression's goofy. And Kay is just looking at this like, what the? And then he sees it's made by the D of O clothiers. I was like, okay, the Duchess of Olin. Sig and the Duchess are constantly at odds, and they're always trying to prank and one up the other. Like Sig infested the Duchess's clothes at a ball with like flesh-eating STTs, or not flesh-eating, cloth-eating, and ate the dress right off of her. They do things like that. They're just, and it's always A-list gossip, like, okay, who's gonna fire the next shot? So Kay sees that these hideous shirts are circulating, and once she finds out about it, his mother's not gonna be happy. But he buys it because Kai wants to blackmail with her later. And buying that pistol really made Sam happy. But the next day, while strolling in the grove, they're deep in the grove, way out past the oak trees. The grove is a huge place, and they're way out. And Sam, with Mount Vith in the distance, buries the pewter pistol that he had just bought for her. And he's like, well, you should have just thrown it away. I mean, why come out here and bury it? And then Sam tells her this is a reminder of here it begins. And he's like, okay, whatever that means. So we file that away for later doings in the book. We're not going to see that pistol again for 2 books, but it's going to come back. I don't put shit in my books that have no meaning. There's no Chekhov guns in my books. Everything contributes to the story, to the plot. And this little pistol will make its mark. But later. Not now. Just later. Oh, so later. Anyways, this week, Chapter 3, Hiei. And this is a fun chapter. It's a different sort of chapter. It's a different chapter. It kind of challenges you to ask questions and wonder a bit about what's going on. And Hiei is one of the sister strongholds. They have 25 on Cana. Hiei is one of them. And I got the name of it from a Japanese battleship that was sunk during the Guadalcanal campaign. Hiei. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced in Japanese, but the way I pronounce it is Hiei. And I just like the name, so I applied it to this Sisterhood Sanctuary. Anyways, let's proceed. I mean, this chapter isn't very long, but we'll get through it. It's interesting. It's kind of weird. And then, if we have enough time, we might proceed to Chapter 4, which is called Strange Doings. Oh, that crazy Sam is up to more craziness. So, here we go. Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, Book 1, The Dead Held Hands, Part 2, Chapter 3, Hiei.
We used to be evil once, and the gods are still punishing us.
The Sisterhood of Light, the oldest Vith sect in the League, maintained 25 strongholds across Cana. They also had a few on Hoban, Onaris, Baz, and Planetfall, Trabuc, and Carina, but Cana was their true bastion. These strongholds were, of course, much more than just places of worship or faith. They were research centers and repositories of great knowledge and learning. These centers were solemn and guarded places seldom seen by any outside the Sisterhood. There was the great bastion of Pithnar, a lovely Vith ruin on the surface, but a vast complex below, where the sisters continued to experiment and test the gifts, a task they had been performing for ages. Testing the gifts was one of their founding missions. There was also the monastery of Attilan, where the sisters tended to their young and trained them for decades. There was the tall tower of Twilight 4 on the southern shores of the lower continent in Remnath, where the sisters researched the odd assortment of weapons the Zaphins and other enemies tended to use against the League. The infamous fanatics of Nals were taken to Twilight 4 and never seen again, their secrets removed from them by methods unknown and unspoken of. Some League circles insisted that the sisters had vivisected the fanatics to get at their secrets, while other, more charitable ones claimed the fanatics had cooperated with the sisters and lived at Twilight 4 in well-cared splendor. Either dispassionate probing monsters or benevolent hosts, the sisters were easily moldable to match the needs and expectations of any who observed them. Their places were strongholds, places of impenetrable security. The sisters were, if anything, jealous of their sundry secrets, and that much was perfectly clear. Though always presenting themselves as polite and shy, they quickly could become bitter and spiteful to any who might choose to cross them, especially to those who might wish to tap their secrets. Those were enemies to be dealt with swiftly. The sisters had, at various times in the past, captured and executed foolish lords who tested them too much. They also had dissolved whole houses in a process they call shashun, the old house of mutt, being a notorious example. Their holdings dispersed, their patents burned, and their progeny lost to the ages in a blast of fire and smoke. It was an unspoken understanding that the sisters were the true ruling power in the League. The central repository at Hiei, north of Esther, was a quiet and dreary place. As typical for a Sisterhood stronghold, it was located in an out of the way area rife with old stories of ghosts and monsters. The sisters liked using superstition and local folklore as a first defense in the security of their places. The ground Hiei sat on was craggy Hytath land, the giants of old. It was situated near the northern sea, not another village or settlement for hundreds of miles. All things being equal, Hiei was probably one of the more accessible Sisterhood strongholds, if one could call it that. The Grand Abbess of Hiei, a progressive and somewhat radical abbess, openly allowed those not of the Sisterhood to visit the stronghold and make use of some of its resources. Some of its resources were available for research, while some were not permitted to be viewed ever, that being the capricious and heavy-handed nature of the sisters, take it or leave it. Hiei was a tall, castle-like structure built of black rock and weathered masonry. It was an old Hytath fort, and as such, it was oversized and rather bleak of appearance. It was once safely perched a fair pace from the crashing waves and cold water of the Sea of Esther, but with time and erosion pulling back the coastline, the storm-driven waves often rode up its sheer black sides. It was notable as being one of the larger book depositories in the League. Books, nothing else, were kept there at Hiei, and usually the books were of an old and unique bearing. Even in the technological and modern League, with its HoloNet and imprinted data, books were still an important method of collecting and preserving information. Books were silent and covert and didn't corrupt or crash. Scanned databases could be hacked, could be uncovered by the gifted and exploited, so information kept in books was usually sensitive, inflammatory, or arcane in the extreme. The cache of books stored at Hiei contained information that the Sisterhoods considered too sensitive to be allowed to be copied and placed in the HoloNet for general use. Still, the information kept there was not considered overly dangerous or overly critical to the well-being of the League, and if proper channels were met and one was well favored, outsiders could come and perform research there. The ground level of the castle was set up as a massive library. Readers came, made their request, and if granted, the book was brought to the reader where they could study it at their leisure. Books could never leave Hiei, and the sisters, kind and smiling, but tirelessly vigilant, always watched. They allowed no hollows, no photographs or scans of the material, but users could make handwritten notes, provided the sisters look over and approve of the content. A typical day at Hiei was nearing an end. The readers coming from all over had conducted themselves properly, and after the 10th bell, were kindly asked to leave for the day. The readers gave their books back, exited, and the grand, oversized doors were closed and locked. None, not even the sisters, noticed the dark figure crouching in the heights of the library. The sisters, blazing with thought and mentality, should have instantly detected it, but for some reason they did not. They were oblivious to its smoldering presence. After they were satisfied that the library was empty and secure, they retired to their chambers and warm beds in the tower above, leaving only 2 sentinels to guard the premises. The sentinels sat down at one of the reading tables and tucked into a simple meal of unidentifiable food. The figure, moving with speed and silent grace, came down from the heights and hid for a moment in the shadows by the door. It could feel that not only was the door locked, it was girded with the sisters' power. Nothing, either by opening it or by wafting, was getting through that door, in and out. It considered this for a moment. Perhaps it had overestimated its own abilities. Maybe it shall die here today. One of the sisters was startled as she ate. She heard something. Not getting up to investigate, not even putting her fork down, she reached out with her mind, inquisitively seeking whatever was there. Her mind was all she needed. With it, she should instantly determine what it was that was hiding in the shadows. If it were a patron, that person was to be immediately interrogated, mentally and verbally, and a determination would be made as to why that person was still there. Perhaps the person was in the bathroom or something of that nature when the library closed. If that was the case, then no harm done. The person would be escorted to a room and a bed, and under observation be allowed to spend the night. If, however, the person was sneaking around for other reasons, then that would be immediately discovered and that person would be set to tribunal. And if that person was determined to be a clear threat with sinister motives, then that person would be killed. What the sentinel sensed in the reaching tentacles of her mind confused her. It seemed that something was there by the door, but what it was she couldn't tell, and that was odd. She got the impression of desperation and longing laced with a hint of fear, and above all else, there was determination backed by steel. But that was all. Nothing more could be gleaned. The sentinel should know not only what it was, but who it was as well. The person's hidden thoughts and feelings made available to her like an open scroll. Stymied, the sentinel put her fork down, got up from the table, and calmly walked over to the door and looked with her unused eyes. She found nothing there, just a huge door, a tiled floor, and the steps leading in. Perhaps she was simply tired. Soon her duty would be done for the day, and she could go to her modest room in the tower high above and sleep. She walked quietly back to the table and continued her meal. But something had been there. It smoothly crept from the door, across the open tiles to the narrow staircase heading down into the vast book-filled vaults below. Moving like a patch of excited darkness, it skittered down the stairs. Perhaps it had expected to meet some resistance along the way, a roaming sister or two, and it was tensed and ready. It had not planned to fight and kill, but it could not be caught and detained. It would not. If fighting a sister was required, then it will fight to incapacitate. If that was not possible, then it will fight to kill, and it was more than capable of doing just that. Fortunately, the stone stairwell emptying out into a pool of waiting darkness below was not occupied. The vaults of Hiei were vast in the extreme, and forever plunged in a cave-like dark. The sisters didn't use their eyes for much of anything, and artificial lighting was not required. The thick darkness also helped to preserve the books stored there. The intruder could also see in the dark, and the ocean of black before it meant nothing, but still the sheer size of the place took it off guard for a moment. If it hadn't had a good starting place, it would never find what it was searching for. It turned to the right, moving silently at speed along the floor. Even though the vault was pitch black, it could see patches of darker darkness, like shadows existing within shadows. It moved from one shadow patch to the next. It had a map clutched in its hands that it could clearly see. Following the map, it made its way into the interior, one shadow at a time. It was headed for a restricted section, a collection of books not seen by any eyes other than the sisters for centuries. Just a little further in, and it would be there. And then it happened. In a crossroad, it encountered a sister who was busy returning large books to their shelves. It came upon her suddenly, literally bumping into her and knocking a book from her hand. They stood face to face for a moment, the sister trying to coil it in mentality, confused, and the intruder tensed and ready. Then they engaged. The two of them suddenly locked at arms. The sister tried to open her mouth and wail and arl in mental alarm. The sisters were thought to be massively strong. Where this supposed strength came from was not known. It was probably an adaptation of the gift of strength turned on permanently. The attacker, though, was strong too, and it had the advantage of surprise, for a sister never expected to be forced to physically subdue an opponent. They grappled for a moment. Then, with a devastating blow, the attacker flattened the sister to the ground, their battle having lasted little more than a second. Dragging the unconscious sister out of the way, it continued. It must hurry. It could not be captured. Being captured meant pain, death, or worse, prolonged torment. Moving on, it finally found the section it was looking for, a row of shelves about 20 feet high, stocked with a multitude of books. It set to work, its eyes quickly scanning. It bounded up the shelves, one after the other, desperately searching, knocking the unwanted books aside as it did. A few minutes later, it found what it wanted, a large tome bound with a blue cover sitting in the uppermost shelf. It pulled the ancient book down and looked at it for a second. The thick and old pages yellowed, the blue leather cover smelling of age. This had better be worth it, it thought. It double-checked to make sure this was the correct book, then it made its way back to the stairs. The sisters were now aroused. They entered the vault in force. They shrieked a horrible drone that filled its ears and caused it fear. It even thought it saw the sisters growing in size as they filtered in, becoming monstrous in their anger as they searched. Calm. Be calm. It waited for a clear moment, then it made a break for it. It wound its way through the maze of corridors, then up the stairs, passing a slew of enraged sisters as it went. Again, they appeared to be having issues detecting it. Such an advantage would not last, and would not be protection for much longer. They turned to pursue, still clearly having no idea what it was they were up against. No matter, for soon they would have it cornered. There was no way out of Hiei. It moved at speed across the open floor of the library. Behind it, it heard the shrieking mass of giant-sized sisters pursuing. It could feel the pinchers of TK trying to grab hold of it, but slipping off. It reached the door, but it was TK'd shut and proofed against the waft. The sisters might have issues seeing it, but they could hold the door shut without hope of it being opened. Seeing one chance, it scaled the wall to a tiny window about 100 feet off the ground, barely larger than the width of the book it was carrying. Breaking out the glass, it stuffed the book through and then shoved itself in, its body compressing down to allow itself to squeeze through the small space. And it was through to the dreary night outside. When the sisters threw open the door, it was gone, having vanished into the night, leaving no trace. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 3, Hiei. So, there you go. A very different sort of chapter as the ones we've seen before. Most of the chapters have been by third-person point of view of usually Kay or some of the Blanchfords. In this case, we have no idea who we were seeing in Hiei and the sisters' library. It was some sort of phantom or creature that had managed to hide itself and stay after Hiei had closed, and it snuck down into their book depository and had a map. It knew exactly where it wanted to go. Then it found the book it was seeking and made its way to escape. And the sisters, we've always hinted that the sisters aren't quite human, possibly might have some monstrous ancestry in their lineage, might have some High-Tath, and that when they start to freak out a bit, they tend to grow in size like the High-Tath do. That's something I've always hinted at. We don't really ever see that in full force, but we get a glimpse of it here in Hiei as the sisters seemed like they were getting bigger and angrier and more monstrous, like the Hulk. Like the frickin' Hulk. Yeah, that's usually behind closed doors, and you usually don't see the sisters behaving in such a fashion. And whatever it was that was in Hiei and stole this book manage to escape. And the sisters are not going to be happy about this, and we'll see in several chapters ahead. The sisters don't like it when people steal their stuff. Doesn't matter what it is they took. The fact that it was theirs and they took it is the main issue. So we're going to see the sisters reacting pretty badly to that in the upcoming chapters. Next chapter, part 2, chapter 4, Strange Doings. So once again, we'll be seeing Sam doing weird stuff. And it's a pretty short chapter, but we'll probably hit that next week as we're past half an hour into the vid. So, until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.